Welcome to your sophomore year at the Tragedy Academy, where you are the teacher and we are the students. Together, we will learn from past tragedy to lay the foundation for a better humanity. The only supplies you'll need: an open mind and a sense of humor. So, tilt that chair back, talk out of turn, and never raise your hand. Because this is the Tragedy Academy, and class is in session. And I'm Purist Scott.
The moment you stick me solo in front of the camera, it just doesn't work anymore. I'm all self-conscious. Hey, welcome to the Tragedy Academy, a show created to bridge societal divides in a judgment-free zone using candor and humor. My name is Jay, and today we are here with actress and screenwriter Christine Twyman. How you doing today?
I'm well. I'm really good. Cold in LA.
It's great to have you here.
Thanks.
What's that?
I said I'm cold in LA, which is kind of a pain in the ass, but other than that, I'm good. It's chilly.
Cold in LA?
Yeah, it's been chilly the past few days, and by chilly, I mean like not 80 degrees, so no one has time for that.
Okay, wait a minute, but where are you from originally? Are you from LA?
No, I'm from Philadelphia, and I feel shame saying this, but like after like almost 4 years now in LA, so 3.5, 4 years, like my skin just can't do it. Like it's like, why is it not?
Oh, so the skin. It's not necessarily the cold itself. It's more the effects of the cold.
It's more just like the fact that I think it's just general indignance. It's like
you're protesting the temperature. I get it. I spent a stint of time in upstate New York when I was in the Army, and it was a land of the frozen chosen. I have no desire to walk around in the slop, and I hate my hands being dry, frozen, and cracked. There's nothing worse. And that happens every time. So I feel your pain. I don't want it either. I have no desire for that temperature.
I'll be honest, though. I actually love the snow. I love the cold. I actually hate being hot, but there's something about just the indignance of it not being what I expected it to be when I walk outside in like Los Angeles. I'm in short sleeves today, and then it's like kind of chilly, and I need a light jacket. I'm like, do not make me go back in this house.
How dare you, jacket. Earth? More of that.
Yeah, I'm like, what is this?
How dare you, reality and all things that are created, go against my outfit today?
I know. It's very frustrating. Like,
yeah, that's a tough act to bend to. I feel bad for Earth.
You should.
Well, I mean, unless you're the only one, then I guess that's an easy deal.
No, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, none of us are. So when we first spoke to you about coming on the show, you had brought up some really cool things, and the show is created to bridge societal divides in a judgment-free zone. We talk about anything and everything regarding the human experience. And with that, there is good and bad. And you can also highlight what's good within the bad. And that being said, one of the things that you had come on to discuss was advocating for trauma intervention via art. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I can. I think that like collectively as society, there are a number of issues that kind of get in the way of people receiving trauma intervention, or honestly, there are like a number of issues that get in the way of people even, having the opportunity to not be traumatized from the jump. And honestly, it's a lot of people really not understanding each other's points of view. And I know for me as a filmmaker, it took me a long time to get to this, but as someone who gets to write and gets to act and gets to literally constantly empathize with other people's points of view and then put that on the screen so that other people can see those points of view. I think that there's just something that I found with art. There's like a certain through line where it's like for some people, for some reason, everyone seems to connect to art in some way. And it seems to create this sort of like dissonance that allows people to see one another's points of view and see one another's perspectives in a way that for some reason, like interpersonal interaction just doesn't. There's so much offense that comes with interpersonal interaction. There's so much defensiveness, but when it's not you having the conversation directly with someone else, when it's you watching the conversation on the screen, when it's you seeing it in an art piece and, at a gallery, it's when it's music, it's just something so different. And honestly, art has done that for a very, very, very long time now. It's kind of bridged that gap. It's like one of the oldest, I guess, sort of professions if you really look at where art comes
I would say it's more of the foundational glue for keeping us together despite ourselves.
Yeah, honestly.
I love how you described all of that, and I can't agree more. I think that we misunderstand art as a whole, and that it's not something that we're looking at, but more that we're sharing an experience of somebody else's mind. Art to me is the ultimate expression of authenticity. And I think that when you are expressing yourself in that manner through whatever art that you are not wanting to do for any other reason than needing to do it. And I think when you create from that space, whether it's tortured or it's celebratory or whatever it might be, it is the only true you. And that is why other people are drawn to you, because they are getting an uninhibited view outside of the mind of how that person actually feels.
Yeah. I feel like it's a really good way to put it, especially when you look at, like, very particularly what I get to do with film, because it is a weird medium to create in. Like it's a weird space to create within, because it's probably one of the few artistic spaces where business and politics interject, and they're all over the space. And it's like damn near impossible to separate them, especially when you get into the film industry. But in theater, it's a little bit different, especially now because of, sadly, the defunding of theater in a lot of ways. But it has allowed that space to kind of go back to being a more creative place. Film is a weird space with a weird sort of trajectory that started off very much for people to just experiment and have fun. It started off oddly. We don't see it now, but started off with a lot of people who, a lot of women, a lot of people of color really began a lot of the film industry. And then the film industry started making money, and then it was purchased, basically. And then businesses began to run it. And so it's a really weird space in which you don't always get artists who actually want to do the art or share the message. You get a lot of artists who are attracted to the industry for a lot of sort of more narcissistic reasons, let's be honest.
They won't succeed.
I don't know, man. It's debatable.
Let me rephrase that. Depending on your definition of success, because you'll be hollow standing at the top. Yeah. You will not be satisfied if you went there for the wrong reason.
Oh, yeah.
That person's not happy. That's why they keep going and doing the same thing over and over again, because they're insane.
Yes.
It really is. I have a question.
Yeah.
You brought up that being a screenwriter and filmmaker, you understand the human experience from a different position now. And one of the things that I had read not long back was that everybody should take a turn at becoming a method actor, for the reason that it allows them to actually empathize with someone to a degree wherewith they can see through their eyes. And once you do it enough times through somebody else's eyes, you end up figuring out that you don't have the key, right? And that you can, it's actually different than what you thought it was. That said, so I admire that you were able to even make that connection. Most people don't realize that. That said, you said that business and art are coming together. And I feel like as a creator and as an artist, is it difficult when you have somebody in there with the intent for money, working within your safe space? Because our art is our safe space.
It's a good question. This is, I guess actually for me, the intent for like money doesn't bother me too much, as long as you give me what I need to get what I'm supposed to do done. Like, if you have those intentions, cool. I think where it becomes more problematic is when we get to like the production aspect of it and what art gets funded, what perspectives get seen, like as far as like being like an actor in a room, for example, or even like a screenwriter in a room, like that tends to be like that smaller space tends to be a little bit better for the artistic process, but like just the general like idea of like who is allowed to take up space in this industry, because it is an industry. We see a lot of problems behind like who funds it, who gets funded, whose art gets put out there, and I know, like it's definitely been a conversation I think a lot more lately about like since a lot of things like the Me Too movement and just so many like and especially since probably a lot of last year with Black Lives Matters movement and just everything that kind of goes into what filmmakers will make according to like almost like a trend. And in some ways it could be good. Like we definitely see a lot more women on screen. We see a lot more people of color on screen.
A lot of knee-jerk reaction.
Mm-hmm. But it's become really it's in a lot of ways very superficial and actually not. It's not as it doesn't bleed down.
I see what you're saying.
People think it is. Like people are like, yeah.
Goes back to that filmmaker that's on top. That filmmaker that's on top that went there for art is the one that gets there.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. It's kind of it creates this like sort of hierarchy though, and it creates this sort of lack of honesty in the industry. I know for me, I've had some not so great experiences trying to, I think, talk more openly and more honestly in this business about like the sort of ego that kind of keeps everything from being able to move forward in like deeper ways. Like it seems so much like things
you're not. So, yeah. Can I? With the ego, you said in deeper ways. So you're probably alluding to not the way that the word is actually abused and explained, like somebody is being bullyish or something along that lines, where more ego as a persona and the way that you perceive things and how you wear your quote unquote mask when you are interacting with people.
Yeah. That's
I say it that way because so many people don't understand what ego actually means. And when you're interacting with those kinds of people and you're dealing with nefarious activities or ulterior motives or anything like that, everybody's wearing a mask.
Yeah.
They're all wearing a mask, even if it's their I'm going to do great things mask, or, I want to give to charity mask. It's still a form of obtaining some kind of reward for an action. It's just a matter of whether or not you're pursuing the right ones. I guess what I would say is the importance that you put on what they're doing, acting, or saying directly influences whether or not they continue to do it. I know that seems kind of counterintuitive, but if you put brain power into somebody else's nefarious mind and their intent, you're only going to recognize it more and not be able to prevent it.
Yeah.
You have to kind of passively approach it, because if you engage with it, you're only going to be butting heads.
Yeah. And I honestly think that is a massive issue in this industry.
It's a massive industry. It's a massive issue in the world.
It is a massive issue in the world. But I think there's a
that's a why are we who we are scenario.
Oh yeah. Well, because we're all traumatized children. Deep down.
That's you know what?
Honestly,
nail on the head. And actually, to do justice to our topic from earlier, we're all traumatized children. And you had indicated that your therapy, or the art therapy, you said that you felt that it was important for abuses against the more vulnerable, being women, people with mental illness, and people of color. That's where the trauma starts. What would you like people to understand about that, and how can we help?
Honestly, I think that I would like most for people to understand it, like literally. Like, I think the beautiful thing, like I said earlier, is being able to be someone who is a screenwriter and an actor. It's literally my job. And I didn't necessarily, I wanted to do this for a while. And when I first started wanting to act, I was probably 18. That was not my thought process. My thought process was like, I like things like, I really want to like make a difference in the world, I guess. But also, I couldn't like choose something that I wanted to do. So I wanted to have lots of different, I was like, what is the one place where I can like learn everything and do anything, be an adventurer, be a scientist, be a lawyer, acting. It was just, my brain was like, I'm thirsty. Let's drink a bunch of knowledge. And I think that people don't realize actors do that. And, like people think actors are not the brightest. And I'm like, literally, we just take on topic after topic after topic and emotion after emotion after emotion all the time. So we have to be bright enough to do that. But
I tried to explain that the other day to somebody about the fact that actors hold a very strong position with regard to the human experience for the simple fact that they've put more effort into being other people than they have into being themselves. So they have a broad understanding for the fact that we're kind of all acting.
Yeah. And I mean, what's interesting actually is, what's interesting is that I've actually personally grown most as an actor, understanding other people as I've learned to understand myself. Interestingly, as I've learned to unpack more of myself and not compartmentalize and feel a little bit more and not disassociate from like what's really happening with me. I feel like my acting, it was like day and night. It's just gotten so much better. And that's kind of the fun of like when you're an artist, your journey is never quite over. There's no like top of things. Like you can be like, in business,
it's an unraveling.
But like, yeah, we never.
Would you say that that you could liken it to, say, if I had like, remember the old Ben Franklin bifocal things, and it had like there was like 4 or 5 of them, and they were different colors, and if each one of those were an issue in your life, and as you rotated them up and you removed them, you had a different perception of what was going on.
Yeah, honestly, that's kind of like that's what it is, and that's what it is every day of my individual life, and that's what it is every time that I have to unpack a character, or unpack a role, or really approach, or even like from the writing perspective, writing is the most interesting thing in the world, I think, because like acting is so much fun and it's really great to embody things, but like the shit that comes out when I write is just like, I'm like, oh, is that what I'm thinking? Is that what's happening?
You don't have to tell me, because art across the board is hysterical. The first thing I did was, just because I'm an idiot, I did an old school Adam Sandler-esque thing that it was T-Rex dodgeball, and somebody said, they're like, and now a T-Rex throws a dodgeball at a kid at recess, and it's just that sound, and then it goes on. There's no rhyme or reason to it.
It doesn't have to be. I think some of the greatest art in the world has no rhyme or reason. Basketball is a great example. Have you ever watched that movie?
That movie is amazing. The Lazy Boy? Come on. I don't know. There's certain movies out there that suck me in, and I don't even realize they're my favorites until someone says that. Like when you said that, I was like, "Oh shit, I do really like that." That's funny.
No one
that
admits
movie
that they
was
like
super funny.
But that movie was hilarious. Like Basketball, What Had American Summer, 2 of my favorite. Like this makes no sense movies. Some of my favorite scenes from anything ever are from those 2 movies.
And you know what? It's because whoever made them did it with pure intent for laughter and bullshitting, and they were 100% authentic when they made it.
Honestly,
they didn't give a shit.
Yeah,
they didn't give a shit whether or not they were going to get paid.
Yeah, and you can really tell. I think there's like even just watching the act, like you can tell. It's always so much fun when you're watching a movie. And you can tell that the people making the movie are having way too much fun moving it. You're like, y'all are very much enjoying this. I can see it in your faces. Like one of you can't hold, like you're barely keeping it together because you want to laugh or you want to smile. I see it, and it's so amazing.
That's why we love outtakes. People love outtakes and any kind of candid recording of somebody doing something that they really enjoy, or a kind of an outtake or anything like that. And I think it's the same thing because they're being 100% authentic in that moment. They are super happy and what they're expressing is uninhibited. We get drawn to it. And whenever you see outtakes, what's the first thing you do? That's a real laugh. You want to sit there. You can't help but laugh.
Yeah.
Even if it's the dumbest thing in the world.
Yeah.
You could be sawing somebody's arm off. And if they started, just busting out laughing, like legitimately that, where you're snorting and you're making weird sounds, the guy getting his arm sawed off will probably laugh. It's so infectious.
Yeah, I mean, that poor guy's mental state. The guy getting his arm sawed off.
I don't know why I went there, but I think because I don't watch a whole lot of movies or TV anymore because I think exactly what you were saying. I feel like the human experience was being misrepresented and it no longer entertained me. But one of the movies that stuck in my head was Hostel. And, and that whole environment down underground when they were interacting, some of the best scenes I've ever seen.
Oh yeah. Honestly,
I feel like whoever wrote that was too authentic.
Yeah, probably. I mean, have you seen anything honestly by Lars von Trier? Feels like that. But I'm a huge horror fan, so it's like, yeah, I completely. Actually, horror is one of my favorite genres to watch for what feels like a weird amount of authenticity from other people. I think that as human beings, we have a tendency to kind of be weird about sexuality or violence. And these are honestly very big parts of the human experience and the human reality. And I think
we've distorted all sorts of things with regard to that. I honestly, if we're going to talk about trauma in women and people of color and things like that, that's where it starts. It starts with the
experience. Yeah.
The way that women are indebted to themselves with regard to their looks from the moment they're born. They have to be handed makeup in order to be acceptable. When they get on camera, they'll be, I'm sorry, I did not make myself presentable, and things like that. That's ridiculous. You want to start traumatizing people early? Do that. Start there and then distort the male mind to think that they're supposed to be in that position.
Yeah.
And if not, then they're less of themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Now, go.
I mean,
be people.
Yeah. I think what's crazy, too, is that people don't realize just how violent that is. How violent the, mass manipulation, mass gaslighting, the cognitive dissonance that, all of us on a regular basis are going through because we honestly don't. I think that our egos would shatter if we all fully accepted the reality of life. It's bits and pieces, bit by bit. You slowly get there because your entire reality would feel like you would suddenly be like, "Am I in the Matrix? Which pill did I take?"
Yeah, no, it would. Your head would explode if you took it all in at once. We take in. It's those bifocals. We need those lenses at the same time. You can't rip off all of them at once. Otherwise you're running around like an X-Men with, rays flying out of your eyes. You have to do them one at a time. And you get that through looking through other people's eyes or unraveling your own trauma. And I think that's probably why you see it twofold. Right? You're unraveling your own things as you experience them. And I think probably through the eyes of other people, when you write these characters or when you research them, you're doing a dual unravel, and that's probably where you're getting all this information and this insight. It's what makes good writers.
Yeah, I think that honestly, I think that I'm a good writer. And honestly, a good actor. Weirdly, because I'm an introvert, and
I've seen your reels. They're great.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm slowly but surely trying to get, I guess, better. I don't know. It's getting there. It's slowly but surely getting there.
It's amazing that you say getting there, right?
Yeah.
as if it were a place that required work to become, right?
Yeah.
And I would argue that you're simply removing past issues in order to actually be exactly what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's been for me, and I'm definitely very in the center of a lot of this journey right now. Like, but for me, I think it's definitely been a matter of almost not even quite removing, but almost integrating. Like, I've learned so much about how many pieces of myself have been separated off and compartmentalized and set aside because of things like having a mental illness. I was diagnosed with depression probably a good 6 years later than I should have been. But when I was about 17 years old, like, got the official diagnosis, had dealt with that,
I was like 20 years late.
I mean, honestly, I think that, like, most people do not get the diagnosis when they need to get the diagnosis. But, like, I think if anyone was paying enough attention for that, then you probably wouldn't have the mental illness. there would have been intervention to begin with. But yeah, most people don't, and especially with something so, I think, sort of insidious, and so many people have things like depression or anxiety. There are a lot of people that do have them, or at least go through states of them, and so people can't separate out. Like for the longest time, as much as I love the crap out of my mom, and she is an amazing person. And when she understood what was happening, she like was very like, okay, we're gonna get this done, and we're gonna get this done. But like, she's a baby boomer, and she comes from a generation where they don't have a lot of language to describe some of the mental illnesses that do exist. And that was a huge portion of like my childhood, was being told like, no, you're just like being angsty, you're just a teenager, it's just hormones, and things like that. And just like the collective sort of gaslight that is that. But
no, you are very, very ahead of your time in recognizing that it's not their fault. And I can see the empathy in the way that you describe that. And I'm not saying that people aren't at fault for their actions and moments and things of that nature, but recognizing that generation do not have the language or the capability to regurgitate what it is that they feel. And I agree with you 100%. And I also would add to that they don't have the experience of how the information is produced now, disseminated, and what is actually real and not real. And it is not their fault. We're choking the wrong neck. We're going after the wrong people in that scenario because they're preying on ignorance. Not mental illness in that particular situation, but ignorance at a high degree.
Yeah, I mean...
I'm sorry, I felt like you were going to say something, so I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, no. I mean, honestly, though, that's kind of the reality of it. And that's the problem that's part of what makes it this sort of cyclical problem. It's also what is creating, I think, such a big... Like, I definitely have noticed it, and like I feel like a lot of people have like that big sort of generational gap between what is now like the millennial and the Generation Z generation, and a little bit of Generation X. I feel like X is kind of like we
are all over the place. We do some amazing things and some really shitty things. Like, there is a dividing line in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's like you can't quite. It's like it's really.
You can get iPhones and mass murder. What do you want?
Honestly, which is honestly part of the reasons I love Generation X so much, but also part of the reasons of like it's hilarious. I think, going back to TikTok, some of the best TikToks are like the ones that are like Generation X. Like, this is how Generation X feels. This is how millennials feel. This is how Z feels. And Generation X is like, millennials and Z are like, we're all traumatized. Life is a shit show. And we're like just getting there. And X is like, we've already been there with a bottle of vodka.
We've the funny thing is X is in a real, X marks the spot for a change. Honestly. Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, that generation is the dividing line, and it's also the beginning of the first levels of a collective understanding and consciousness. I mean, it is, as rickety as it is, the way that we're disseminating information at this very moment is the next step. but it's also the same people that had, were latchkey kids and barely, heard any kind of information outside of their, four walls or their small town. So there's a wildly vast amount of change in that generation, just from end to end. I mean, Atari 2600 to iPhone. Come on.
I mean, honestly, that's there is a lot of truth to the fact that, like, I mean, if you really look at what's happening, Generation X was kind of born on the genesis of some of the newer waves of psychology, born on the genesis of the new, like, waves of technology.
Young.
Yeah. Like, this is, I mean, X really does start so much of it.
Hey, academics. Have you endured life's tragedies, trials, and tribulations? Did you adapt and overcome? Do you have advice for others to pay forward and want to be a guest? Then email us a brief 2 to 3 minute video to show@thetragedyacademy.com and tell us how our academics can learn and grow from these experiences. Thanks again for your support. And now, back to class.
Getting back to trauma and the understanding and the empathy that we're talking about from all these different situations, what is it that we see happening to these vulnerable sects with regard to the violence that you were talking about?
So I think that first and foremost, I would say that as much as I do firmly believe that, like, women, people of color, and with mental illness are at a higher vulnerability, I think the reality is we are all part of this, like, a very vulnerable, like, we're all just in a very vulnerable situation for a lot of the reasons we just discussed, including lack of language around trauma, and parenting around trauma, and then getting into, when you are someone who is part of a, like as you call it, like, disenfranchised group, the systemic trauma, and essentially, I think the violence that we focus on, which often is physical violence, sexual violence, financial violence, those violences are the last violences. The first violences tend to be psychological and emotional, and people don't quantify like that. Like, they don't quantify emotional battery, emotional violence as human beings, and that's part of the biggest issue that we have, is that, I mean, emotional violence is everywhere.
Core wounds. Core wounds. It's
core wounds, and it is literally everywhere. It's indoctrinated into our daily activity. I mean, just going to watch an ad on TV is emotional manipulation right there. The entire concept of systemic racism is all built on one massive sort of gaslight and lie about, like, what people are, what the differences are. I mean, literally, race is literally a construct, and it has traceable roots that don't go beyond, like, 500 years. So, like, I mean,
it's beyond me.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I understand. I grew up in the disenfranchised and mentally manipulated area of the South, whereas the finger is pointed the wrong direction from both sides. Instead of pointing up, they're pointing across and not looking at it from a socioeconomic standpoint with a foot on both necks. Yeah. Instead, they're simply taking it out on each other and placing the importance there. Never going to work.
Yeah, I mean, but that's how the system is constructed, basically, right? Like, we're pretty much everybody. Like, it's other than what we may call the powers that be. The system is constructed so that it's just crabs in a barrel. Everyone's trying to climb over top of each other, unaware of the fact that, like, they're all in a barrel. And the problem is that,
I love that, crabs in a barrel. Did you come up with that?
No, that's a saying. That's like a famous saying.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I've never heard crabs in a barrel in my life.
Really? Oh, that's something I grew up. Maybe it's the East Coast.
It sounds like a really, really funny game that you'd play with your buddy, telling them they had to, like, bob for apples.
Oh, definitely don't put your head in a barrel of crabs.
Exactly right.
Make that choice. But it's probably, it was one that I grew up. It's like definitely a saying I grew up hearing, and it's I mean, it's
No,
true.
it's a
Have you ever
perfect
watched?
description.
Yeah. It's like, it's amazing to watch. And it's amazing to watch crabs in a barrel. It's kind of the most tragic, sad. But, I mean, really, that is what it is. Everyone trying to climb over top of each other, trying to get out of the barrel that we've all essentially just been put in because by the people that are trying to eat.
The irony is there's no barrel. There's no barrel.
There isn't.
That's the thing. We're chasing our own tail.
Well, that's like the giant sort of like the collective gaslight that, really does exist. And that's the violence that's begetting all the other violence. And it really is just like, and it's so much of it really is just construct. Like so much of what we think is gender expression is a construct. And so much of what we think is racial expression is a construct. And it's really like, at the end of the day, it's so fascinating to see the amount of hierarchy we've created based on just microscopic things when we are all literally humans. Like I was thinking the other day about the concept. I think I think about this daily, but like the concept of so honestly, I firmly believe that we do live in a very patriarchal society. I don't necessarily think it benefits men as much as men think it benefits men, but I do believe that
that could be summed up in all of the stomach cancer cases across the world.
I mean,
every single issue that men have is they do not understand that it's directly linked to the fact that they're oppressing somebody else.
They're oppressing something, and I feel like there's so much men are oppressing themselves. I'm like, I feel like, how painful is it that you can't cry in front of someone, that you can't feel fear, like little things that men are taught that they're not allowed to do that make them so very, very human. But it's because they have to build that wall around this idea that the feminine is negative, when really we all have both sides inside of us. We all are a little feminine.
Oh yeah, yin and yang.
Masculine, and we need both sides. They complement each other. But the fact that men are taught to kind of that in order to oppress the female class, men have to then believe there's something wrong with it. Like they have to justify that. And in order to justify that, they have to say, oh, these things are wrong, which means that they have to then cut all of those things off within themselves. And so men are stuck not being allowed to be whole human beings. And that, I mean, have you, like, how does it feel to not be able to be yourself? It's fucking frustrating. And it makes you into a bully because you're like, and you begin to envy the parts of yourself that you can't be. So you start bullying people that have those parts. And that's
spot on. I could. This is exactly. We're mirrors, and we don't get it. Just like the feminine and the masculine, everything that we hate, we are suppressing.
Yeah.
It's because of the fact that we're looking or jockeying against our mind. The mind gets in the way because it's been, just like you said, it's a construct. It's layers of experiences over time that have not needed to ever exist to begin with. Yeah. They didn't. Everything that we're doing, it's kind of a film, if you think about it, because there's really no reason to do it to begin with, right? But you get a lot of time when you're afraid to talk about death or why you're here. You come up with a lot of other things to do with your time. And then but that's a whole nother branch, right? But the ability to look at somebody else and oppress them, because of the fact that you were taught that they were deficient. You looked at, let's say the man and woman scenario. I believe that when we're taught those things, women are, lesser than or weaker than and subservient or whatever ridiculous construct that is out there. I believe that when we exercise those positions ourselves, that it creates the animosity within ourselves that is the anger, and all of those feelings are because deep down, we know what we're doing is counterintuitive, being symbiotic with the people that we're supposed to be with. It's all just an internal battle back and forth that never needed to exist. It's been handed to us genetically and hereditarily over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And genetically, it's very key. I think people are starting to talk about it more now, but just like the epigenetics behind like how we are storing trauma and information in ourselves, and just how like it's like something that I definitely, I mean, I've been reading the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo.
I don't know that one, but I will definitely read it.
It is a great book. If for no other, I mean, it's a great book when it comes to race relationships. It's a white woman writing to other. She kind of like frames it as like liberal white people, like, so obviously not like the like not necessarily, I guess not liberal white people, but like white people who are trying to unpack whiteness, basically. Like, so obviously not the person who's like wearing a hood.
Understood.
You know?
Somebody who is starting to unravel the experiences in the construct.
Yeah.
And it's almost like an instruction book.
Yeah, it's just kind of, it's talking a little bit about like even just like, yeah, which is where this, like where to look at the more microaggressive privilege based issues. But what's also really cool about the book is like, I mean, it's not necessarily written for me. I'm not the audience, but what I really have enjoyed about reading the book is just the sociological standpoint. Because she uses other examples that aren't race to kind of illustrate things. Like she uses feminism and like sexual relations. She uses LGBT plus and heteronormative, straight relations to kind of illustrate some of these points. But because realistically, it kind of exists across all of this. But the point being that, as I meander through this, the point being that she really just kind of talks about like how inundated we are with a lot of what we've been taught and how much it affects our lives in a very pervasive way, and that the journey toward becoming better and unpacking your privilege, whether I personally see whether it's white privilege or whether it's I'm a cisgender straight woman, so that gives me certain privileges. Like all of those privileges, those exist for you at all points in time, and whether you want to acknowledge them within yourself or not, they do still exist for the class that's being oppressed by them. And really understanding that every day, if you are not that oppressed class, is a daily issue in trying to understand where you, in even small ways, are oppressing that class, because it is so ingrained in our society. And I'm so sorry, but my computer is dying because it hates me. So it was 100% charged. So I'm going to plug it in really fast, but I can still hear.
Yeah, no, go right ahead. Right on.
It's like an old computer. And by old, I mean it's like 5 years old, which of course in the land of computers is ancient.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, like that's really, like that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. Like I know that I've experienced it, and I know that I've been like on the receiving end of it, like that immediate sense that like I should get defensive about like I'm not, like I have friends who are part of the LGBT plus community, and like there are times I have to check myself and be like, listen, yeah, like I like in that moment I saw myself as like, oh, I'm not against the LGBT plus community, but like when a friend is like, hey, that was a microaggression, I gotta be like, okay, pull back, okay, I don't understand it. Explain to me why it was a microaggression. Okay, got it. Like I will make sure not to do that again, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how I feel about it. It matters how that person feels about it, and how it feels like they're really, how it feels like what I say or what I do or a certain perspective that's been kind of like trained into me is negatively affecting the reality of who they are as dimensional human beings. So, but people don't always get that. And the fragility around it.
Yeah, I had a experience. I talked about it on the show a couple of times, where I came to understand later in life that experience revealed to me the construct of how we interpret things on the outside. And I had a friend that stupid situation, ran into my barracks room, and he was laughing and he had his hand over his mouth, and he said that that my buddy threw him a remote control and broke his front tooth. And I was like, what? And I was like, he pulled his hand down and his front tooth was broken in half. And in that moment, two different scenarios happened to me. One, he looked like a hillbilly idiot, whatever the constructed mind was supposed to accept. But at the same time, it hit me in the side of the head, and I didn't like it. I didn't like that my mind thought that, because he was none of those things. He was not a yokel or whatever that might be. He wasn't unintelligent. He wasn't, simple-minded or any of those, backwoods or whatever thing we associate with a broken front tooth. None of those items exist. But my brain was doing it was working overtime to make me take that interpretation.
Yeah.
And that to me was a defining moment. Later, I figured that out because it always bothered me. And once I figured out that through meditation, it just kind of dawned on me. And I was like, that's why it bothered me, because everything that we believe is based on what our predecessors gave us and nothing more in the slightest. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was like, yeah, it's very true. And it's actually really interesting. And this is where I think for me, art becomes a really great facilitator in this. So I remember when I was back in college and I was doing theater, one of the things that we learned about is commedia dell'arte, which is basically like old school mime clowning. It's like back before there were like white mimes,
like the solid black and white mime doing like the rope and all that kind of stuff.
Older than that, we're talking like this was like back when like kind of the dawn of miming and clowning started to become a thing. Commedia dell'arte was basically
jesters,
kind of, but it was designed to be okay. So commedia dell'arte is kind of what SNL is, but like really like old. And when
it's SNL 1.0.
Yeah, it's like SNL. It really is. And the whole premise is people in commedia dell'arte have certain costuming. So like the actors all get dressed up. Like they might do like, they all have very specific masks that they wear depending on what character in commedia dell'arte they are. So like there's like a Zani, which is a character in commedia dell'arte, which is like, usually they have like a mask with a long sort of nose or a long hooked nose, which comes from some very anti-Semitic places, essentially in their origins. But
I'm tracking.
Yeah. But the thought process is they would have these long noses. They would often walk very silly, very monkey-like, and they were kind of like the comedic. They were like the jesters of the group, and then there would always be like a character who would be like the villain, and the villain often was like tall and thin and lanky and had long fingers and
the
just
twisty mustache guy that he evolved into in like the 20s, the guy that's tying people to the train tracks.
Yeah, I mean, and still today, like, I mean, watch any Cruella de Vil movie. What is she? She's tall. She's
that's
thin,
a great point.
Lanky, long fingers. These archetypes are created a long time ago in like the artistic world, and they've shaped so much of how we see things. So like, there would always be one character who like, their mask would be like big chubby cheeks, and the person would be like in a fat suit, and they would be the chubby person, and they'd usually be the lazy one. How frequently do we view people who are overweight as being like lazy? I mean, like it's really fascinating to watch, and but these are the archetypes that we've kind of trained into each other. And if you really look at some of the origins of like how art was created and how theater has been created and how, so like, I mean, it's been very, very specifically used to communicate overtly and covertly a lot of messages to people. And I think that more than politics and more than religion, I think that art has this beautiful opportunity to undo what it's been misused to do, which is be honest about what things are. We have and I think film is honestly a really great medium for it, because film is probably one of the most honest sort of like human to human mediums in a lot of ways, because it's not a big show like theater is, and it's not art where it's a two-dimensional piece that you can find many dimensions in, but it's still kind of a two-dimensional piece. Like you actually, when you're in film, you get to be a person talking about something that you're thinking, feeling in a very specific situation that creates all of these really emotional, like all of these high emotional stakes. And they get to, like the camera gets to get close to you and really see how you're feeling, even when you can't say how you're feeling, or cry, that the camera can get close to its eyes in a way that like a lot of art hasn't been able to over the thousands upon thousands of years that art has existed. So yeah.
I agree with you. I do think that art has been misused. And art, we've based on, the things that we said in the first half of the show, art is what it is. It is the most powerful tool out there because it is creative expression and it comes from such a raw place. I have hope. I think that the global existential crisis forced people into a situation where they got to pursue their art outside of the means that they were getting it before, which is by the almighty dollar. But necessity is the mother of all invention. So there's more green screens draped across the world right now than there are anything else because in homes, all across the world, because everybody needed to still create their art. They needed to put it out there. And I think that because art, I think it was needed. I think it's part of evolution. I think we needed art to get us through a certain amount of time, i.e. industrial revolution, science, math, things like that. I think it facilitated a lot of what we've got now. Without art, none of the things that have come downstream from that exist. But we've come to a point now where we're aware that it was a tool and that we need to wield it in a different manner. We need to take art now and use it to put the brakes on everything and reevaluate what it is to be a human. I think this is destined to happen.
I mean, yeah, I think that's art at its core, and I speak of it as almost as if it's its own living, breathing thing, because I think in a lot of ways it has kind of become that.
Can't not be.
I mean, yeah, it at its core has always been, I think in its own way, has always kind of been doing its job, but we've definitely co-opted it to do certain things, like some of the earliest sort of evangelism, as it were, for a lot of the church was artistic. But I mean, art has always existed there to do exactly what I think it has done, which is connect us all. Like the world wouldn't be as connected as it is today if it weren't for art. I mean, literally some of the earliest art is like hieroglyphics, pictures of cave walls, and art has always existed for us to connect to one another and tell stories and communicate. And it has always done that, and it always will do that. We have to start making, just smarter decisions about what we want it to say. I think once upon a time when the world was a lot simpler, it said what we needed to say. It said the story of what we had done that day. It said the story of a tribe or a person or a hunt or a situation. It told those stories. And then the smarter we got, the more we realized how powerful it was to leave behind stories. And so it then became this sort of business of leaving behind stories. And it did become sort of an outlet for the ego, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but how that outlet's being aimed has been not always.
I think I'd like to add to that. I think that it's veiled the fact that we're actually afraid of death. And we started creating immortality, so to speak, because your first rung is God. There's somebody else that's going to keep me around because I know that I exist, which is really shitty because that means I know I'm going to die. So I can't figure out God. So what's next? I start acting out things and create my new immortality, which is a legacy. It's like children. It's whatever I build. It's whatever I write. It's whatever those things are. It's just another reach or grab at immortality, some kind of legacy. And I think when we don't do it for the right reasons, it shows. When it's art, it's funny. I feel like when someone is doing something that they don't necessarily feel the way they do about it, it tends to look like an angry piece of art if they don't agree with it. and then vice versa. Like you see that it just, if you love what you're doing, then it'll be a different piece. I think it evokes whatever you're fighting against.
Yeah. I think very much that's very true. I think that's because as much as people don't fully understand it, art is really, it's not really, even though we share it with each other, it's not really for anybody else. Like art is kind of for ourselves. Like it's like we're unpacking bits and pieces of ourselves, whether we are conscious of it or not. That's usually what's happening in art. And it's just like anything, right? Like when you hit a wall with what your ego is kind of willing to accept. Like we see this with like people who have like narcissistic personalities, like something will approach their wall and their wall doesn't want to accept it, and so they can get really explosive and defensive. Even if you don't have a narcissist, like just a narcissistic moment in a person, you can just see where it just doesn't want to go through, and there's like usually really high emotional response around that. It's like, what's it that it's, if it's hysterical, it's historical, sort of like you just you see a hard, like your ego is like trying to protect you, so you see that hard stop. And with art, it kind of like you will still see that same thing, so you'll start to see those really high, over the top, intense emotions happen for an artist who is not fully comfortable with the art that they're making or the piece of themselves that they're unpacking. I was actually talking about this last night in my acting class because a teacher was explaining to me about giving an improv. Like he gave me and one of my other classmates an improv to do, and we had to. It was a very difficult improv, but he had given this improv like probably 30 years ago to someone, and in the improv, one of the characters reveals that she's transgender to another character. It is a very complex situation, but one of the characters reveals that she's transgender to another character. And because it is an improv, the other character doesn't know this. Like the other actor didn't know that this was going to be part of the reveal. And he's like, I once had to kick an actor out of class because his response was so angry. Like I was afraid I had to stop the improv. I was afraid he was going to hurt the young lady who was playing the transgender character. And but like that's what it is, and that you'll see hard stops like that when it comes to.
Can there be a more classic example of what someone is struggling with in their own mind to be able to scream it that loud and have a meltdown right in its face
when you know it's not real?
But exactly, it doesn't matter though. When presented with what we are struggling not to be the most, it elicits that reaction because we don't want to admit it. We can't accept it, and it's not even our fault. It's because we were told we couldn't do it to begin with, no matter what the experience.
Yeah, and like that's
sorry, that person probably has problems with their internal gender preference or some kind of I can't even put myself in the shoes, but whatever that situation might be, then I'm certain they're going through it.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. I don't like to assume that I know anything on behalf of anybody else.
But there's definitely some sort of, for whatever reason, that hit a chord. That hit a really deep chord. And
it didn't just hit it. It like dropped like a manhole cover on it or something.
Yeah. I was like, I mean, dude, you know it's not real, right? Like, you understand what's happening. But that's what happens.
That guy was, I hope that he got to the right therapist that told him it's okay to be who you are under any circumstances.
Hopefully, but I think he's telling me this story was back in the 80s, so we don't. Who knows whether or not that.
Yeah, that might have been up with the most recent issue we've had. might be a member of that group.
Honestly.
Right. You know what? We've been on for an hour, and I could really keep going. And I honestly, I think that I've learned a lot today from you. And I think everybody that listens to this is going to really take away a lot of sage advice. And I want to thank you for taking the time out to provide it, all of it, to us. It's with regard to the art and the trauma and, how we can address it for all of these different groups. I think that if I could wrap it up, I would say that that we need to change the direction in which we utilize art so that it benefits those people that are transitioning or going through a traumatic event. And I think that's across the board. Even more so for those that are in the most vulnerable situations today. It's kind of like triaging medical. You're not going to take a heart attack after a broken finger. You're going to flip them around. Right now, this is the worst situation, so we focus on that. And that means focusing creative mind. And I think if, with people like yourselves making films and portraying what it is and who it is that we are, what this human experience, I think that you carry a very, very, very heavy burden if you truly believe in it like yourself. Because to be able to write, I feel like we've been writing where we go the entire time we've been playing this game that is being a human. Those first people that wrote the next chapter. Each one writes the next chapter. Why do you think our technology keeps landing in the next chapter? We're playing make-believe, and then we're creating or manifesting that make-believe over and over again. But now we have the ability to steer because we're aware that it's actually happening. And I think that if we're going to use our creative minds in our art, that couldn't be a better place to start. So thank you. I genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on the show. And I really appreciated hearing your half of how you feel about it. And yeah, you asked such amazing questions that it's like, oh, pressing me. It's pressing me for those. I was like, ready to get this deep today, but okay.
No, that you can ask questions when someone has an open mind, and you present yourself in a very open manner, and I like that. It's a vulnerable state to be in to talk about these things, and I can appreciate that you're here doing that because it does. Not all people are writers. Not all people are actors. Not all people are able to put themselves in the situations or feet of other people. So the onus is on us or those of us that have been through, trauma and have come to the realization that it is a choice to remain in it or to remain a victim, that we have to utilize that knowledge wisely and push it forward. And I'm looking forward to your films, because I know that they're going to be super, super detailed and they're going to really explore the human experience. All right. So again, thank you. And remember, academics, be cool and keep learning.
Hey, academics. Thanks again for attending another class at the Tragedy Academy. You can show us some love by subscribing, downloading, and rating us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Or ask Amazon Alexa to play the Tragedy Academy podcast. You can find links to all major podcast platforms and past episodes at thetragedyacademy.com. You can find us on all the majors of social media, on Instagram at The Tragedy Academy 2019, on TikTok at The Tragedy Academy, and on Twitter at @tragedy_academy, where we'll post our clips of upcoming shows, updated info, and thoughts. If you'd like to be a guest, send an email to show@thetragedyacademy.com. Keep an eye out on Instagram for Tragedy Academy giveaways. Thanks again for coming to class, and remember, be cool, keep learning.